Oh, hello. Hey Sam, how you doing? Today's either Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not sure which because I was so excited to get this started that I did it Tuesday night just right after you filmed yours. So my brother's fiance asked me last week if I was doing okay because it seemed like I was being a little bit um, of a worrywart. I seemed a little sad. And the fact that I ask myself regularly if I'm doing okay made her question seem a little extraneous. I'm really excited about part two just because it addresses both of the things that I was really concerned about with part one. First off, the vernacular, and second off, that I didn't spend enough time with the characters. This is doing what the beginning of a book should do. I'm not sure why it didn't start like this in the first place. One of the nice things that you see really quickly here is that there is going to be a lot of narration that's not done by Max. And that narration is actually really technically well put together. With a couple of exceptions, there's no vernacular. There are a couple times where it says tell, T-I-L-L, like the thing that you do with an old-timey cash register, instead of until. But that's just nitpicky. But this all brings me to the question, why do we have Max as a narrator? And it's the same question, I think, the very same question for why Jay Gatsby and the Great Gatsby was not the narrator. If you've read that book, you know that it's really strangely put together. And I am talking about the Great Gatsby, just I'm talking a little bit extra so you can switch gears. The story's weird because it's called The Great Gatsby. There's a character named Jay Gatsby, but Jay Gatsby is not the narrator. There's some random schmuck that Jay picks up. Perfectly reasonable guy, nothing wrong with him. He's the narrator. And he does a fine job of it. His character is kind of centered around this outsider that's in a position where he can look in and see this wonderful opulence that's taking place throughout the entirety of The Great Gatsby. So why is Jay Gatsby not the narrator? It seems like you'd want to keep as few characters around as you possibly can while conveying the similar quality of story. Well, if you look at Gatsby's character in general, he'd make a very terrible narrator. He's very self-aggrandizing, he's very self-absorbed, he doesn't really pay attention to anybody. You aren't going to get these descriptions of these wonderful, lavish parties just because Jay isn't in there in the first place. And you want there to be a first-person perspective to draw you in, because if there's not a first-person perspective, then this is going to be a story about a lot of rich white people that aren't doing anything terribly remarkable. And, of course, the writer is not going to stoop himself down to Jay Gatsby's speaking level. And he's not going to bend and mold Jay Gatsby into what he wants him to be so that he's a sufficient narrator. Jay Gatsby is exactly who he's supposed to be. So he made a narrator that can speak through the book in a style that was comfortable to him. Why is this all important? Why am I talking about all this? Because I don't think that Max is a good narrator. And I think this reflects on how well put together the parts that aren't narrated by her are. Why not just have this all in third-person perspective? And I can see why there's not this third-person perspective, because you want to have the characters invested in Maximum Ride. You want to have them invested in this character that's fairly cold and fairly aloof, who's only seeming warm and comforting by the fact that she's very doting on Angel and that Fang's around to be her foil. That's one of my big complaints for this, is that the vernacular is not a hang-up on James Patterson's part. It's just not necessary. I am a fan of Iggy. I'd be kind of okay with if he was a narrator, if anybody had to be the narrator. I think Fang would be a probably more viable narrator because he's a little bit more inside of his head and he can have that metacognition. He can have that part of him that's asking, why the heck am I doing this? Why are any of us doing anything right now? And Maximum doesn't have that part of her. She's very intentional in the fact that she's not really thinking through what she's doing. So there's no real time to breathe when it comes to the prose of Max. That's why this entire second part is able to allow characters to breathe by letting Max not narrate it. One of the big things I really don't like here is how people are addressed. This is a really big way of characterizing people, just seeing other characters talk about them. The way that the characters address the researchers that are putting them through all these awful tests are not very believable in the way that they're talking. These researchers are described only with adjectives, and you think, well, how else are you going to describe anything? You're going to describe them with word choice. Where does it say that? Ah, there we go. I scratched it out. That's why it was tough to see. Talking about Angel going through tests, this is what Sam was talking about, pretty much putting her on a treadmill with a cattle prod. Her lungs had started burning bad an hour ago. She hadn't been able to feel her leg muscles longer than that. But every time she stopped running, a sadistic whitecoat, Riley, zapped her with a stick thing. It's called a cattle prod, but that's okay. Why say sadistic? First off, it's a very hard word to say, apparently. Why not let this be an opportunity to show how somebody in the situation would actually feel? Let me give you an example. Say that you were dating a girl for a while and she broke your heart and it's very, very sad. If you see her at a party, you're not going to say, "That was a bitter she-wolf that broke my heart." If this is somebody that caused you real bitterment and real resentment, not like the grandiose, but like she actually hurt you in a way you can't really describe. When somebody asks about her, you say, "Oh, her." Why do you say, "Oh, her"? Because you don't want to talk about her. Because you'd rather talk about literally anything else right now. And this is something that you really want to move on from. This is how people talk about people that they really, really don't like. More often than not. They don't want to talk about things, and you can tell when somebody's actually holding back, like, really quickly. Later in this, it says to the white coat, "She was a piece of science equipment like a test tube." That's not true. You don't run experiments on test tubes. Chapter 37, she is put through more humane trials where she's going through a rat maze. And if she isn't going at a dead sprint, then, either the ground heats up or, more cattle prods or whatever. These people really like cattle prods. And the big twist is that she reads the researchers' minds and figures out what the maze is next time. And then she sprints through it like that. I don't think she needed to have run through a maze to figure that out. I feel like there is a really good avenue for a lot of creepier stuff that they didn't touch because they are going just with cruelty. Because they wanted to make this some sort of allegory on how we're being cruel to animals and animal testing. And I'm not going to say one way or the other about that because that's not really the point right now. I'm saying if we are talking about actual people that are sentient, that can be manipulated, that can be pushed around here and there a little bit. Why don't the experimenters do that? I feel like that'd be a lot creepier. And I feel like that'd be something that would enter in this little bit of dread that would really freak somebody out a lot more than cattle prods. They could have done more. I didn't like that 37 opened up with the bell clanging jarringly. I think Stephen King fairly famously said that he doesn't use adverbs in his books. That's the reason why. You can use adverbs wherever you want, but the bell clanged. We know what a clang sounds like. The word clang is jarring enough. You don't need the word jarringly in there. It's all by feel, and it's all by kind of assuming that people are either reading this aloud, and so you have to focus on the physical sounds the words make and see if that makes sense. Read it aloud to yourself like you would poetry. Poetry is a really good example of focusing just on being read aloud. Or people aren't reading this with a little voice in their head, they're just skimming through it, in which case you make sure that words like jarringly are not in the way of that. That everything is very straightforward, that everything is something that you can get all the information that you need without being distracted by stuff like jarringly. And that's something that this book does quite a bit, and that's why I say that's fairly messy, because my eyes are trying to roll through this and it's fairly distracting. And that's not something that you want to do with your audience. And either they're taking their sweet time because Angel needs to be there long enough to figure out that Jeb Batchelder is there, which is it serves the plot sort of mentality, or these kids really don't want to rescue Angel, or James Patterson really wants to fill pages. This is not a short series. He has plenty of time. And I think right now a little bit of a cleaner story would have been nice. I'm glad the characters had time to move around. They didn't need that much time to move around. That's all I got. Have a nice day.